I've been talking about Hoffman boots for a very long time. You guys know that I'm a huge fan of this company. And it's not just the great products that they make. It's the story behind the company and the people that run it. This generational family of shoemakers right here in North Idaho makes some of the best hunting boots and pack boots and lineman boots and all your boot needs right in one place at hoffmanboots.com. For us hunters, I highly recommend the Explorer. And I don't care if you're running in the 6-inch or the 8-inch or the 10-inch. Personally, I love my 8-inch Explorers. They've got the Vibram sole. They are totally waterproof. There's no break-in period. Guys, you can't go wrong with Hoffman boots because you get all that without breaking the bank. So check them out at hoffmanboots.com and use promo code all caps lock Huntsman10 at checkout for 10% off and find out why I have been wearing my Hoffman boots for years and years. Don't be one of those people that have it in their mind that Savage Arms is the same firearms that your grandpa was running around with 40 years ago. It's not. Big game hunting rifles that you can count on. I love my Savage firearms. I have got the Savage 110 Hunter, and my daughter is pretty happy with this 110 Apex Hunter XP. The AccuTrigger is a really interesting little piece to this firearm, and it's a new piece of technology that if you've never tried one, you should, because it'll make you more accurate. It's a much easier, higher quality firearm than anything else I've got out there, and I've got a lot of firearms, guys, and so if you're in the market for a new hunting rifle, make sure you visit savagearms.com, because I promise you're going to find something that is accurate, easy to handle, easy to use, long range, functional, just a high quality weapon that you could take to the field and have a lot of confidence that when the time comes, you've got that Savage backing you up and you're going to be notching a tag. Check it out, savagearms.com. Let them know the Western Huntsman sent you. Thanks, guys. There exists a threat, from anti-hunting groups to politicians trying to give our land away, and we won't stand for it. Those vast western landscapes provide the space for our wildlife to thrive and a place for hunters and anglers to fuel the fire that sparks their soul. In this show, we share our love of hunting, fishing, and conservation. Here, we provide the foundation to meet these threats through passion and the grit of the American outdoorsman. Welcome to the Western Huntsman Podcast. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Western Huntsman Podcast. This is Jim Huntsman, your host, coming at you from the Broken Tine studio right here in Northwest Montana, and brought to you by Eastman's Hunting Journals. Thank you, guys. That was a mouthful. For tuning in. We're going to do a little something different here tonight. I've got my good buddy, who we've been talking a lot lately, and you've been seeing me post a lot lately because we went on this bear hunt together, or fishing trip. I don't know which one to call it yet. But we're going to kind of joint record this for his podcast over at Fieldcraft Survival and my podcast. So this should be a lot of fun. So Kevin, my brother man, it's good to finally get on the line and knock out a podcast with you again.
Oh my gosh, it's so good to be on the podcast with you, or I should say the podcast with you. I am really got my fingers crossed for this one that both of our recording systems don't go down. We have better luck with this podcast than we did with that hunt that we did a couple weeks back.
Right.
But we'll see what we can do.
Well, I kind of like this setup here. Instead of recording like over Zoom or what do they call that other program? Everybody, Squadcaster. Everybody uses that one. And they're good systems, but we hooked it up the old-fashioned way, and it's pretty cool, man. I'm just excited because what we wanted to do was record up on the mountain, because I took that mobile recording studio thing. It's like the one that you have, that Zoom system, and
yes.
We just ended up, by the time we got back and around the fire, we were both just like too worn out after the day to like do a quality episode. I feel like, especially that second night. Was it the second or third? I think it was the third night actually. We're like, we're doing this tonight. We're gonna record a podcast, man. And like I looked over at you, I could tell you were wiped. I felt it too. I was just like, okay, that cot in that little trailer we pulled up there is calling my name, man.
And I think what it was, I mean, for those of you guys that are listening that are wondering what it involved, the spring bear hunting in Idaho, as I found out, is equal parts bear hunting and fishing. So I packed a bag. I flew out there, and we'll get to the gear, including like, the knives that were brought. I know Jim's got an awesome Columbia River knife and tool hatchet and a knife that he carried out there.
Oh man,
but
yeah.
we'll talk about that gear in a second. But I flew out there with just as much fishing gear as I did hunting gear. And when we weren't checking out the bait for the bear, we were walking down the river and we were trying to find these honey holes. And we ended up fishing one day in the sun it was the whole day. Like we were like, should we go check the bait site? Like, no, the fishing's too good. So when we eventually made the drive, and I forgot how many miles it was, but it was like a good 20-minute drive, which you graciously did multiple times a day. So I appreciate you for that one. But we would go up there, we'd be like, okay, nothing, we'll go back tomorrow. We get back to the camp and it was like, well, we could eat, we could, smoke a cigar or, have a bourbon or whatever. And then it was like, well, we should do a podcast. And we were like, that cot is feeling pretty darn good. And put it on my little ninja shoes that I brought as my camp shoes. That felt pretty darn good. And we never got to the podcast. So we're finally here now.
We're finally here. And, I kind of want to talk about the reason that we fish so much because, some of my buddies have given me a hard time that, we had a lot more pictures of us fishing on the river than we did actually bear hunting. But let me tell you guys something. I'm never going to tell you where this river is, but I'm very familiar with. Actually, this was a tributary to the main river that I'm very familiar with, and this one fished just as well as the main river. So I'm never going to tell you what river that is, but let me tell you, it is a hidden secret. It is a North American blue ribbon treasure of a trout stream, and so when to set that up, like spring bear over bait is not like other hunts where you get up pre-dawn and hit the mountain and you're glassing all day, you're moving, you're covering country, that kind of thing. That's not the kind of hunt this was. This was an over bait hunt, and so in Idaho, you could set a bait barrel, and you guys know if you listen to my show, we've talked about bait barrels and bait sites and all that kind of stuff for a long time. You don't want to camp out on the bait all day because the more you're there, the more scent you're putting off. And I don't care what you're doing to try to cover your scent, that scent is gonna spread through all the drainages that you've got your bait site set up at, and the bears are gonna know when you're there. And so, what I found is the sweet spot for a bait setup is like the last 2-3 hours of daylight. I max it out at about 2 hours. Part of that is because I'm impatient and I have like a short attention span. I don't want to sit on a bait site for, hours on end. That's why I don't sit in tree stands for whitetail and all that kind of stuff. But the other part of that is I have found that if you just kind of touch that bait site daily for a couple of hours, they start getting used to that scent and will start coming in more often than not, even though they know you're there. Because, again, the bears know you're there sitting on a bait site, unless you're 50, 60, 70 or more yards away from it. But most bait sites are very intimate. So when you're going up and spending time on the mountain, the way to fill in the time when you're not on that bait barrel is to fly fish or just fish. And because you weren't fly fish, tell everybody your fishing setup, dude.
So, I'm right. Like I grew up in Connecticut. I grew up where I was only a few minutes away from a trophy trout river, the Farmington River. And before I moved out to Utah to work for Fieldcraft, and obviously I live in North Carolina now. Before I moved out to Utah, I lived even closer to that trophy trout river. So I'm torn. I could fly fish, but I love spin fishing.
I do too,
that's what I grew up doing. So I grew up spin fishing. I brought a 6-foot spinning rod. Actually, it might have been a 6'6" spinning rod. or maybe it was my 7. I think it was my 7. Now that I'm looking at it in the corner over here, it's my
Is it?
7-foot ultralight rod, and I brought a Shimano Stratic reel. I have braided line, which some people would say that they don't like braided line for fishing, but I love braided line.
Well, and
And I was using
to that point, people that
yeah
say that they don't like it, the fish that Kevin caught prove that theory wrong.
yeah yeah. And I bought all ultralight gear, so a lot of Panther Martins, a lot of Meph spinners, Aguila, no, Aguila, um, spinners. I mean, I didn't have any luck with like the Castmasters or the Super Dupers or anything like that. But the beetle patterns, anything that had red in it, seemed to work really, really well. And then just the standard rooster tail, like the
Yeah.
classic rooster tail. And that was so much fun to fish. Like I've always said, if you're trying to put food on the table in the great outdoors, what's going to really feed you long term is a 22 rifle or a 22 pistol and an ultralight rod. And I mean, we caught and released everything. But if we were trying to eat, we definitely would have ate well, especially that day that we hiked down to that honey hole.
Yeah, that spot. And just so you guys know, we were talking about doing this competition because I had my fly rod, and you guys, I am super confident with my fly rod, and Kevin smoked me like a cheap cigar. So I called the competition off because I didn't want to fess up that he beat me with a spinner rod. But and this is coming from a guy that is I am not picky about how to catch fish. Like I've just found on the river, generally speaking, I've had much more success with my fly rod than I have a spinner. But it's funny, dude. After we got back, me and I loaded up the wife and kids. I don't know, a couple days after you left or whatever, and we went down to this reservoir that's by the house here, and I took one of those red aglias, and I caught the biggest bass of the year so far. It was like, and I don't normally catch largemouth on an aglia, man. It's a kind of not like a known thing, but yeah, he hammered it, man. But we had a great time from the standpoint of when you're out there. I love seeing like the differences in different methods, and I like taking people like you to learn things that normally, like I would never think to take a spinning rod on that particular river, but the rod that you had, it was only that 7-footer. And you were throwing the spinners. Like I have all those same spinners in my tackle box and everything, but I would never even think to take a spinning rod on that particular river because it's so fly fishing centric, and that's why it's catch and release and all that. But I think that could be, and barbless hooks. And by the way, guys, we debarbed all our hooks, whether it was a spinner or a fly. And so it's not easy to catch a fish on a spinner that's been debarbed because they just get so, fidgety, if you will, and they jump a lot and whatnot. But anyway, it was just interesting to see that dynamic where I think that river gets pretty hammered by fly fishermen, and all of a sudden this guy shows up and knows how to work a spinning rod, and the fish really responded, especially that brown trout that you caught right off the bat. That poor dude, we kind of stole his spot, and we didn't steal it. We just were walking up there. We didn't know he was there, and all of a sudden we saw him, and his dog was there, and he'd been fishing there for a couple of hours or whatever. And he's like, "Yeah, it's fishing okay. It's doing good." And I'm like, "Yeah, what kind of fly are you using?" He's like, I can't even remember what he said. And you, as we're talking, throw that spinner out there and catch that clunker of a cutthroat that is just a rarity on a river like that. And how big? I'm trying to picture it in my mind because we didn't measure it, but I want to say it was somewhere between like a 21 to 23-inch fish. And
there's a couple things we can say about that, right? Like number one, I wish I maintained it better in the net. Like I was like, all right, I got to get this thing off the hook. And I had it in the net, and then I went to go pick it up, and it kind of fell out. So we had these like kind of fast photos of that fish. But
most of the photos were just stills from the video I took of you reeling it in.
So when you look at the size of the fish against the net, you kind of get the idea of the size of it. Like the thing had shoulders on it. It looked like a football. But what really, really was my favorite moment on that whole stretch that we were fishing, and kind of to your point of like just knowing the river and understanding it, like where I grew up, rivers like that are so common where you have those rock gardens. You're fishing and like everyone wants to throw a lure into the perfect deep pool with a nice eddy line on it. And you have that change of tempo in the river from slow water, fast water. But I remember at one point I'm starting to move upriver and I'm trying to get your attention. And at one point you're like, oh my God, is there a bear? What was he waving at me
Yeah,
for?
I thought you saw a bear, man. I'm like,
Yeah.
where? Because we had
And I'm
our
like,
rifles.
right here. Yeah, and I'm like, right here, right here. I'm like pointing at it with my finger, and I throw it, and I catch one. You're like, oh, and then next thing I see you come up there. I'm like, throw it right in there.
I know.
And I think that to me is I think one of the better lessons, just to kind of convey to the listeners is, everyone wants that one hole where it's maybe super pressured, and the way that I described it to you was, I was like, look at all like the Miss America contestants, right? You have the one that's the winner that is clearly a beautiful woman and super talented or whatever, but the runners up are equally beautiful, talented, and whatnot. Maybe the judges got it wrong. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
they don't get
all those spots on the river are great spots. You just have to know the little nuances of how to throw a line and work it through the rocks and whatnot. And there's fish that are holding up there because they might not like the pressure that the winner gets.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that statement. What gets me too, Kevin, with like the whole, like the foundation of this discussion, I guess, without trying to sound too fancy, is you and I were two dudes, and we go out there.
Yep.
We've both been very successful fishermen. That we've had a lot of success in the woods. And what happens is when dudes are driven like I've made this argument in the past, dudes are pretty much driven by ego, right? We're all driven as dudes by ego and experience and what we perceive as success. And I think that ego can really get in the way of a lot of people. Like I could have gone out there and I could have been like upset that you'd caught this giant. Again, I just to try to put this into perspective, I think we posted the picture, but it's somewhere between 21 and 23 inches of a native Yellowstone cutthroat trout on this river. That is a big trout on a river. That is a huge trout in these particular waters. There's a lot of fish in these waters. And so, like, I could have been like, oh, man, well, that was just dumb luck or blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But the thing is what I liked about you and what I hope you like about me, I don't know, there's not much to like about me, but if there's one thing that I hope that it is that I love to take people that have a completely different experience in life and perspective into an environment where I feel like I have mastered and learn things from them, like that spinning rod on that particular river. Man, I'm taking a spinning rod in there. I will go in there and debarb those hooks and go after some of those trout, because I think that there is something to that where they just don't get that kind of pressure. They're used to seeing the elk hair caddis and the green drake and the all these flies that get presented to them. And I caught a lot of fish, but it was like this different dynamic where you caught the first one, you caught the biggest one, and you just kept catching fish on the spinning rod. And I love taking lesson from that and not closing myself off to like this ego driven, self-centric kind of thing where it's like, well, that was just a fluke thing, and really I know better, kind of, because let's face it, these are my waters, man. This is my home. And I took a guy that lives in North Carolina and he fucking outfished me. Like, what? And I love it, man. It's such a great lesson. And it's the same thing going back to, I made a post about, here's the thing. I made two posts. I made a serious post, and then I made like just a humorous post where I told you I had the, what did I call it, man? The electronic, the fire starter stick, or what? I'm drawing a blank on the name, man.
electronic
Ferro
ferro
rod.
rod.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
ferro rod, where I made that joke of a post where I'm using the blower for my for work and whatnot. And the thing is like I've always prided myself on the fact that I know how to build a good fire and I can keep it hot and I know how to get those coals hot and build them up and all this stuff. And I thought that like I was the master of fires in my group of peers, because I've got a lot of peers that just have this misunderstanding as to how fires work. And I've always had this fascination with fires. Then all of a sudden I bring you up, who's like this bushcraft background kind of guy that has also an equal fetish for fires as I do, and which is why we're peeps. And you taught me that the amount of kindling used is like, for me, this was this big takeaway. I don't even know if you know this, but you use way more kindling than I do. And what that does is that prevents that little lull from kindling to bigger wood catching fire. The amount I've used, it always works, right? It always works, and eventually that fire gets hot. But I would always have like this lull kindling to that mid-sized wood, to the actual log-sized wood, where it would like kind of smoke a lot but still be flaming, and then finally it would catch and go. Where the fire you built, it grew. It started small and kept growing and consistently kept growing, and then all of a sudden we had hot coals much faster than the way I did. And so I watched you the second day to figure out what I was doing wrong. It was the amount of kindling that you were using in that fire that made all the difference. You didn't have that lull and that smoky time. I've never even thought about the fact that maybe I'm not putting enough kindling in the fire to create extreme amounts of heat really fast. And I learned that. Again, I'm coming up on 44 years old. I have been building fires since I was a kid, and I thought that I was a master at this. And I learned a lot from you just by camping with you and drinking coffee around a campfire in the morning, how you lit that and how you set up that kindling and the amount that you used. Holy crap, man. Like my fires have been improved dramatically since that.
And I'll just say this, like it all comes down to a matter of perspective. And I think when we're young and we watch an older person build a fire, we say, okay, well, they're putting small sticks and then larger sticks and then larger sticks, but you don't notice little things like what's the quantity of those small sticks?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
what is the type of the small sticks? Because I could easily grab green wood that's small diameter, but because there's so much moisture content, it's just not going to burn as efficiently as something that's deadened down or dried. And then you start getting into like, okay, well, there's dry wood. Well, there's also dry softwood and dry hardwoods. And we know that softwoods are going to put out more heat. They're just going to burn out faster. So as you get more and more experience and you spend time with different people, like people would say, well, what am I going to learn from a cook? Someone that just cooks in the backcountry, right? They just cook. Well, guess what? They're building a lot of fires to get that Dutch oven going. And they also probably don't want to clean their cooking pots. So they're using the better wood, the hardwood, once those fires are going, because it's not going to emit as much soot, or about as much soot on their pans as burning old pine wood. So as far as the fire is concerned that we were building, I mean, we had cedar that was so straight grained. It was a carving dream. Like
I was thinking about that, man, how impressed you were, how straight the cedar wood was here.
I mean, I was making chopsticks with the damn stuff, like perfectly grained chopsticks. So yeah, we had cedar, we had some good hardwood, and basically the type of fire that you build, the type of fire that I built over there. I mean, I always do the platform embrace, which is straight out of Peter Kummerfeld, the guy who runs the company Outdoor Safe, and he was a former SEER instructor, and you're basically just doing one corner of a log cabin. And you pay attention to the direction that the wind is blowing. And what you do is you position that corner where, if you guys are imagining this, imagine the wind blowing from the inside of the house into that corner. So the apex of that is downwind. And you have all the concentration of the wood as it's stacked up in that corner, taking all the air, taking all the heat, taking all the fuel. And as you said, it just, you light it, you step away, and you just watch it grow. And that's one thing that I pride myself in. It's not if I can get a fire going. I want to be able to get that fire going with the first strike of the ferro rod, or scrape of the ferro rod, or one match. And I want to be able to step back and just let it do its thing, which is why when I do a modern survival class, one of the challenges I have my students do is you are going to build a 5-minute fire, which once it's lit, step back, it better burn for 5 minutes. Because if you can get something burning for 5 minutes, then you can always say, well, I'll double that. And then I'll make it burn 3 times as long. And next thing you know, if you can understand that basic concept of light it once, step back, let it do its thing, then you can scale that to however long you want it to burn on its own.
So
And
step back meaning you can't throw $3.49 Joe Biden unleaded fuel on it.
Oh, well, if I were to tell anyone, like, liquid Boy Scout is more kerosene than it is gasoline. Kerosene tends to burn, gasoline tends to explode. But
no,
hey, listen, I'm also for learning from mistakes. So why don't you throw a little bit on there and get a little scare and then never do that again?
Yeah, there's no reason to use, and you're talking to a guy who has lit many a fire via gasoline, and other even more fires via, because I prefer diesel. Diesel doesn't explode; it just kind of slow burns, and it'll really get those embers going. But there's no reason to use gas on a fire. There's really no reason. The fuel that the gas is using is not producing, or I'm sorry, the flame that the gas is producing is not nearly as hot as small kindling is going to produce. And so it's always been a big topic, man. I've written articles. I even did a podcast on camping for beginners. Like, I'm not talking about survival type camping. I'm talking about the person that maybe they just bought their first tent or their first RV, how to pick out a spot and how to build a fire and what kind of firewood to use. I've done podcasts like that. And so, again, it's one of those things where I thought I was like the master and commander of the high seas when it came to fire building. But I brought you out there, and now I've got this new tool in my toolbox where I learned this new way to get the fire and the coals super hot, which are going to be, like this time of year, we're coming into July, not going to be super critical, man. I can go out there and sneeze on the fire and the son of a bitch will light. But come into like late fall hunting, like, you going into October and November where there's a lot of moisture. There's a lot of just like saturated wood, things that make it a lot more challenging to light a fire. I learned a valuable lesson from you 2 weeks ago, and it was super interesting for me to like come to this realization that maybe I am not the master and commander of the high seas when it comes to building a fire, because I really appreciated that knowledge and just like learning how to carve that wood and create the kindling a little bit better and you utilize more kindling, because there's always enough kindling. It's a big stuff that you run out of, you know what I mean? And so, it was cool, man. It was a fun experience. I really enjoyed hunting with you, Kevin.
Oh, well, I enjoyed the whole aspect of it. And just to wrap up this thing about fire, I think one of the other big takeaways for you was the cheater stick with the tomahawk.
Yes.
And we talked about how guys will buy a bundle of firewood, or they'll have firewood and then they break up the tomahawk and they break up the axe. And then there's always that one guy in the camp that is holding a piece of wood up on the chopping block with a finger and then like moving the finger just out of the way, keeping that wood balanced long enough for the axe to make contact. But then, good old libations, alcohol, whatever, lack of sleep, anger,
a little bit
gets
of
in the
everything.
way. And
Yep.
a little bit of everything. Next thing you know, they don't move that finger out of the way, or they're like, well, I haven't hit it ever, so I'm just going to keep it there. Next thing you know, a person cuts themselves on the finger, on the hand, or whatever. So I was just like, here's a quick trick, cheater stick. And you just hold it in place with that. And you had that Columbia River knife and tool, the Chogan, and that thing is razor sharp, and it's an awesome tomahawk. It's got a hammer pole, which makes like more tool than weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And with that hammer pull, that thing split like crazy because it's got all that extra weight.
It was like butter, man. I've never had I have a lot of hatchets, I have a lot of axes, but it's called if you guys listening, you got to get this thing. It's called the CRKT, the Columbia River knife and tool. It's called the Woods Chogan Tomahawk, and it's $60. And it's worth every cent, but it is super, super sharp. And this thing, you just touch the top of your piece of kindling and put a little pressure on it. On the small ones, it'll cut right through it. And then if you go to the bigger chunks, like Kevin was saying, we're using this cheater stick and we're just kind of beating the top of that tomahawk down. So because I'm guilty of that, Kevin, man, where I'll hold the log, and I'll go
Mhm.
down with the tomahawk, and I know at some point I've got a thumb that's going to end up in the fire, or something, because at some point I'll miss, especially if I have one of those famous Kevin Estela old fashioned cocktails that you made up there with
You
the
got to talk
orange
about
peel.
that too.
Oh man,
Yeah.
yeah, and if I had one of those and tried to do that, I'd definitely lose some fingers. But I think that the sharpness of that Chogan tomahawk it actually makes it safer. If you use a super dull axe or a super dull hatchet, you end up having to hit that thing harder, and it's harder to aim when you're hitting it harder. And like I have had a few accidents where I've cut myself pretty bad. One time on the wrist with a hatchet, and I think that the sharpness of that Chogan tomahawk, like just right out of the box, man. I've never used that until we got up on this bear camp. And I've got their pocket knife, and I've got that. What did you call that? Yeah, the Soldatna knife, man. That thing is bitching. I love that freaking knife, and just the way that the functionality of and how sharp they come right out of the box is like a game changer. And so anyway, I don't want to. I'm not like trying to pump it up too much, but you guys really do got to check out the Columbia River Knife and Tool Company. It's all CRKT.com. Get that Woods Chogan tomahawk and the Soldatna knife, and those two tools I think that every hunter should have those.
Yeah, and I guess while we're on the topic of gear, I should probably give you guys like a rundown of the gear that I carried. I packed out there. It's probably going to be easier for me to do kind of just like a quick like summary of everything. So
Yeah, let's do that.
yeah, so the rifle I carried was a Sako Adventure 90 and 300 Win Mag. We all know it's the Lord's caliber, and I was using what 170 grain power blade ammo from Sako, and unfortunately I didn't get a chance to use it on the hunt. But the rifle, I had to round it out. I had a Leupold VX6 HD 3 to 18 optic. And then I brought it just because I knew we were going to be in tall brush. I brought a Spartan Precision tripod that was able to, hold my or hold my binoculars, hold my rifle and whatnot. As far as my backup, because Jim was like, "Hey, we're going to be in grizzly country," I brought a Ruger Red Hawk and 44 Magnum, and it was loaded with 300 grain Buffalo Bore hard cast ammunition. And I'll tell you, like, I'll continue with the gear list in a second, but there was at one point we were in the blind and we heard something, and Jim was like, "Yeah, by the way, if there's a grizzly, you're going to have to shoot the barrel. You can't kill the grizzly, but you need to scare this thing away." I'm like, "Oh my God." Like it became very real, like what we were doing. Like we're going to be very close distance to something that could rip us both apart.
Oh yeah.
So then the other gear that I had on me, I carried a Kifaru shape charge.
Can I interject real quick on that? What he's talking about? I have a 55-gallon steel drum barrel that I cut holes in to put the attractant in the baits to attract the black bears in. But obviously, if you're going to attract a black bear, you have the potential of attracting a grizzly bear if you are in grizzly bear country, which we are. And so by shooting the barrel makes quite the ruckus when you hit it. So you have the I guess it's the reduced blast of the gun because we both had silencers. But that bullet hitting the barrel is like a pretty intense sound, and that'll chase off a grizzly 99% of the time. And so that was a reasoning. So sorry about that. I just wanted to kind of like clarify. You had the Kifaru pack. Is that what you're talking about?
Kifaru shape charge backpack with the Sherman pocket, and that thing worked great for getting the tripod up there, getting the basics up there, and it wasn't that far of a hike, but it was through very thick country. There's no doubt about it, and everything that I brought, I was very pleased with. Now there were some other things that were in that pack that just made sense that didn't get broken out, like was a Benchmade meat crafter knife, and there was, I brought a Randall knife with me just for giggles. I brought that knife, and I brought a hollow handled survival knife because I'm a knife nerd.
You are a knife nerd, dude. Like you really are a knife nerd. I am not. Like these CRKT knives are the best knives, hands down, that I've ever had in my life, because I'm just not a knife nerd. But it makes a big difference. Sorry, my phone's going. Did you hear that beep?
I didn't hear a beep.
Oh, okay.
I think you're just hearing it, man.
Maybe I am.
So maybe.
I'm still hungover from those cocktails you made.
Yeah, and we got to get to that. So rounding out the gear, guys. So that Red Hawk I carried in a Black Point Tactical chest holster, which we'll talk about yours in a hot second.
Heck yeah.
And then, obviously there was the fishing gear. So a pair of Sims waders and boots. I carried a Grail water filter, which, that to me is the game changer all around. You've got 3 different ways that you can treat water with it. You can filter, you can boil with it, or you can add tablets to it. And then as far as clothing, crispy boots. I wore a pair of crispy boots out there. And then my clothing was all Cryptek. And guys, I've been using Cryptek since 2015 or so. And I'm going to be doing some more work with them. In fact, they actually, we've been talking, and I don't know if you guys have been looking at Cryptek or anything like that. But if you use the code WILDED20, that's WILDED, WILDED 20. That's my discount code through Cryptek, and I'm just going to be hopefully writing for them and sending them photos and all sorts of good stuff. So
cool.
Cryptek clothing, Kavara backpack, Seiko rifle, or Sako rifle, and a bunch of knives.
Man, I feel like it's cool that you do that. See, and again, to the listeners out there, especially from the audience of the Western Huntsman, if you're listening to it on that platform, they're going to be blown away, because I hardly ever talk about gear. And it's like, I'll forgive you for running, or I'm sorry, for wearing the crispy boots for this one, because I'm a Hoffman boot guy. But no, they were nice ass boots, man, and they all really are. It's such a, I think, because I get so many messages, man. They're like, hey, what are you using here and why? Sometimes the answer to that is I don't know why. I have this gear. I like it. With the exception of my Hoffman boots, Hoffman boots has been a long time. I've had this gear long before I had the podcast, like the Hoffman boots. And I use those Explorers in the 8-inch. It's a fantastic fucking durable boot. I love this piece of equipment. I was going to buy the pack that you brought up from Kafaru, but they're out of stock. So I'm just waiting for them to come back in stock. But I also talked to my buddy, Mike Hearn. He was on last week's episode. So he works for Kafaru, but he kind of convinced me to go with this different pack that they had that attaches to the frame, because it basically, when you want to use it as a day pack, it folds down as much as yours did. Which one is yours again?
The Shape Charge.
The Shape Charge. This one started with a B. And again, this is why I don't talk about gear. I don't pay attention to the names outside of the fact that it was made by Kafaru. We're lucky I even know what Hoffman Explorer boots are. Okay. I just know they're Hoffman, right? And so, thanks, Annie. And then, so with that, what I'm saying is, there was a couple things that I was really jealous about that you had. One of them was that Kafaru pack. And so, but again, the Mike Hearn was telling me that this other pack folds down to about the same size, but you'll have the frame to it. And the reason why that's important is because if you're back there, like kind of where we were, where I took you hunting, man, you are sworn to secrecy, big time.
You didn't say a word,
because that is prime North Idaho elk country. In fact, I've had more elk encounters in that little, I'd say 50 or 60 mile radius than anywhere. Well, That's not true. There is a mountain in Unit 6 that I've had more interactions, but beside the point, it's a great spot. It's a really good honey hole for me, and I'm like the only one that hunts there. And so the point is like if I'm up there and I'm a mile in or something and I get an elk down, it's nice to have the frame to pack out the first quarter. And so I'm not like, okay, I have an elk down, but I gotta run back to the truck and get my other pack to bring up to get these elk quarters out or whatever. So that's the reason why. So anyway, I really like that pack, and I really like that Cryptek gear that you had out there.
I think the pack that Mike Byrne was talking about, was it the Bane?
No, but it did start with a B. I swear. Hold on,
Okay.
I can pull it up because
So while you're talking about that or looking it up, the interesting thing with a lot of that, like, kind of echoing what Jim is talking about here is, the cryptic clothing that I had, I wore that to Alaska in 2016, and I've been using it hunting in Connecticut for quite some time. If you buy once, you cry once. I recently said that somewhere, like on a podcast or online, and I had people say, like, that's wisdom. I'm like, I didn't come up with that.
It's the Bedlam pack. By the way, it's a Bedlam. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another great one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think we've all gone through that phase, whether you're buying hunting gear, fishing gear, camping gear, shooting gear, whatever, where you buy like the minimum acceptable standard, but then you quickly get tired of it, or you're like, okay, it worked, but now it's not great. I should have just gotten that slightly better one, a little bit more expensive one. Because if you kind of look past the minimum acceptable standard and just get something that's slightly better, it probably is going to last you longer.
Which will save you money.
Usually.
Yeah.
Which will ultimately save you money, right? And
totally.
That money can turn into additional tags or additional flights, or whatever. Like let me put it this way, guys. Like, yeah, we were unsuccessful in, taking a bear on this hunt, but my gear never failed. I can say that there's not one piece of gear on that whole trip that I would say that I'm not going to bring back when I go back there in October, because we've been talking about this. After Jim has his elk season, I still have a tag. I still got to get that. So it's not a bad idea to get your spring bear tag, but then start saving up for your fall season in case your spring bear doesn't pay off. And if you buy the good gear, you'll have extra money, hopefully, because you only bought once, than having to buy a replacement for something that breaks on your first trip.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do. I have a thing, man, where like I'm at a point in my life where I can buy the more expensive gear. This hasn't always been the case. So if you're like in your 20s and you're struggling between like a good solid team elk, a Burlestock pack, or a more expensive Kifaru pack, I'm going to tell you right now, the important thing to buy is tags. And you've heard like Cody Rich talk about this on his podcast a lot, where I want to give him credit because I feel like he was like the OG of buy tags, not gear. And he couldn't be more accurate in that. And so I want to tell you, like, if you're starting out, if you've got babies and you're paying for diapers, there's like this fine line of like when I was in my 20s, I would have never spent $600 or $700 or $800 on a pack. No freaking way. I had babies. I had diaper bills. I didn't make that much money. I had to go catch fish strictly to feed my family at several points in my my younger days. I just didn't have the money. I remember going to the lake to catch. I was all stressed out because I started out not catching fish. Then I started catching fish, and I caught enough fish to kind of help us out, reduce that grocery bill. And that's why like deer hunting was stressful back then. If you're in that kind of situation, what you need to do is buy you a pack that's going to work like that, a Burlestock Team Elk. And I bring that one up because that was the first expensive pack that I bought. And it's not that expensive. It's between $300 and $400. It's a great pack. It's a great value pack. There's another brand out there. Gosh, I'm totally going to draw a blank on it. I have it as a freighter pack. One of my freighter packs is this pack, but it's one of the ones you see at like if you shop at a North 40 or a Murdoch's or one of those ranch stores that have a hunting section, they'll have one of these. Anyway, or you can find them on Amazon too. For the bang for the buck, they will get the job done, guys. But as you get more settled, do not buy packs over diapers. But once those diapers are gone, man, you go get you a Kafaru or something of equal, standard. But I really like these Kafaru packs from that standpoint, and they do not sponsor this show. They should. Dude, Kevin, we should hit up Aaron, man. They should sponsor the Western Huntsman. I talk about them all the time.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think there are so many companies that should sponsor. I don't even know if they would. I mean, I'm sure Aaron listens to a bunch of stuff. I'm sure he hears his name get mentioned all the time. But there's other companies too where it's like we should have been sponsored by the company that made the bourbon that you brought, by the way, because we didn't get to that. Like we kind of been talking about packs.
I still have that bottle, man. I'm saving it for October. I have it hidden
and I hope you
in
still
a
have
box.
The cigar.
I do. I have the cigars, but I might smoke the cigars because they might go bad.
Well, you know what you should do, because I know you're not a cigar smoker, but you should try them. Like really get a taste for them. And I'll bring 2 fresh ones, so that way, like you don't accidentally smoke one the wrong way. You know what I mean? Like you want to.
Yeah, good call. Good call.
Get a good light. Use a piece of cedar to light it, because we know that matches or a butane lighter are going to impart a weird flavor. So, in particular, Spanish cedar.
Okay,
really
I'll see if I have any Spanish cedar here in Northwest Montana. You know who should sponsor both of our shows is the Criterion cargo trailer. Tell everybody about our setup, man. That was pretty cool.
So when Gilman's telling me about this hunt, and he's like, yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a trailer up there. We'll sleep in the trailer. I'm like, okay, no problem. Like I've slept in trailers before, no big deal. And before the trip, I was like, hey, should I bring a sleeping pad? And he's like, maybe a sleeping pad would not be a bad idea. It could be kind of cold that night. We could get anything from like 80-degree weather down to freezing. And I'm like, okay, no problem. So I brought a sleeping pad. And I didn't know, when he said trailer, I wasn't expecting a cargo trailer, but I was expecting
a
like
40-foot fifth wheel.
Well, either a fifth wheel, because I know you've got those at the house and everything.
Oh yeah.
I thought maybe like it was going to be another type of like camping trailer, but I was like, oh, this is actually kind of like back in the days of when guys would show up to trade shows and they'd pull up to the parking lot and the show would be in the morning. So instead of getting a hotel, they would just crash in the trailer and then just drop their sleeping bag or whatever. So we actually slept really, really comfortably in that trailer. I'm not going to say who snores out.
Dude, I if I had to put money on it, I know I would snore louder, but I was pretty impressed with your snoring. And
after getting up at 2:30 to leave my house to get to the airport for a 5 o'clock flight and getting out there, I was wiped that first night, and I was like, I'm just gonna pass out.
I know, and you did, man. And I was like jazzed up because I picked you up from the airport. I'm all excited to get to camp and get bear hunting, and like I wasn't ready to go to bed, and you went to bed, and I'm like, okay, cool. I'll just sit around the fire and hang out, and whatever. And I go to bed, and it was impressive snoring, man.
Yeah, every once in a while, I definitely surprise people with these capabilities that I'm not aware of, and of course I'm not aware of that one because I'm unconscious. But So the best part about that trailer is you wake up in the morning and obviously gorgeous campground, gorgeous area, and everything like that. And it wasn't until like the final night or the final day that I woke up, and as I'm walking out of the trailer, and I've got those like the eye booger glued shut eyes, and I'm looking at the sign near the door, and it says not for like human invitation, or
not suitable for living quarters is what it says.
Living quarters, and I'm like okay, maybe not, but we just proved that wrong, So I wanted to like take a marker and put a slash through there and be like, hey,
epic fail, Criterion. You don't need that. So this is a Criterion cargo trailer. I think mine is the I don't know, the 12 or the 14 footer or something like. It's still a single axle, and it's my trailer for my roofing company, guys. So like I usually have it loaded down with tools and shingles and all sorts of stuff. And so I unloaded this thing down to the bare nubs. and I put a couple of Cabela's style camping cots in this thing. And the only complaint I have is if it wasn't long enough to like separate the cots, so we had to like step over them. Like specifically, Kevin had to step over the cots in order to get out. But it has the drop ramp on the back and it has a man door on the side. And actually, this thing, it had the venting, the front and back venting, and it has a little light in there and all that kind of stuff. And you drop that back support jack to keep it from like bouncing a lot. It still bounced around a little bit, but I mean, honestly, man, that's the first time I've taken it and done that. And I've thought about it a lot, but it worked out pretty damn good. I was pretty impressed with, like, it stayed warm, it stayed cool. It was like, it was not a terrible place to be, especially when you're camping in grizzly country. I'd much rather be in that than in like some little tent that would be nothing for a grizzly to open up, you know?
Yeah, and that hard shell tent, like the trailer, I think that was a great way to go. I mean, we camped well, we ate well. Obviously, we had the the old fashioned drinks, which I turned you on to with the filthy cherries, which Hughes Company.
Yeah, tell everybody about those, man. That was actually a pretty amazing drink.
Yeah, so guys, listen, like I don't mind roughing it. I will wipe my butt with snow. I will absolutely make cowboy coffee without a filter and kind of sit through the grinds of my teeth. But if I can, right, if I drink, I'm gonna drink to remember, not to forget. I like having a good old fashioned. Like that is my drink. And one of my former students from when we had the North Carolina office open was Filthy Daniel Singer, who's the founder of Filthy Cherries. Filthy Foods. And Daniel, who has hired me to go out and do private training for his company. He's been a good friend. I'm always taking business advice from him for my own LLC. He he's always like, well, you and your friends will never run out of cherries for life. Okay, you're going to make me a serious alcoholic.
Yeah, he didn't know you were friends with me.
Yeah, I can always put those cherries on cheesecake, which is another vice. So, so the old fashioned, if you guys don't know, an old fashioned is shots of bitters. It's simple syrup. It is a section of orange peel, a couple measures of bourbon, and a good old filthy cherry. And I gave one to Jim, who's like, just like me, he likes drinking bourbon, but he doesn't do the bougie thing until now. And now I think he's kind of hooked on the old fashions because they just went down so smoothly on that trip. And, here's the other thing, guys, like there's conversations that he and I are going to have that were fantastic around the fire, but they're conversations that you have to earn by being there. You have to earn by hanging out with one another. And like we talk about everything from like, our early lives, our loves, our, things that we regretted. And like, it's just cool to be on a hunting trip, fishing trip like that with someone who like, we had never really hung out before that. We had talked. I've been, I guess, on his podcast. We saw each other at the Western Hunt Expo, and they were like, let's do this trip. And then there was a 50-50 shot that we were going to get there and be like, oh God, he does this. Oh God, he's into that weird coffee. Like, there's something that could have happened, but none of that happened. And like I said, we had some good conversations that, we'll just stay around that fire.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting, man. I'm super picky about who I hunt with. I don't like, I mean, let's face it, and I talk about this on the show quite often. I'm very much a solo hunter. And part of that is the fact that I like to be alone and have it just be me against the wild. There's something to that. I like the solidarity of it. I like the challenge of being a solo hunter. And I'm also, I don't know if it's my time in the Marines and, other things that have affected me over, through the years. I don't like to be around a lot of people. And it's funny because I do a podcast, and it's also funny because I'm very social and I do like people, but I like my alone time. And so hunting to me is kind of my escape because, I run a business, so I'm dealing with people every day, and sometimes it's overwhelming. I get people that complain about, a one little teeny nail that ended up in their grass or whatever that are customers, and I have to bend over backwards so they don't write a bad review, and I have to deal with my wife's social requirements, if you will, and all of those people, and I don't mean that in like some negative way, but it's like I live way out in the sticks in northwest Montana because I like the solidarity. And to compound the point, people have a tendency to really irritate me when I'm hunting with them because they sometimes don't want to make the right decision, or they want to not make a decision at all. Where I'm like, I will make a decision, and if it ends up being the bad decision, I will make another decision, right? And so I make decisions fast. And so I don't like having these debates as to whether we should go up the drainage or down the drainage or go back to the truck and drive 10 miles and go somewhere else. I just like to go and make the call as it comes to me. And being camping with somebody, if you're with somebody that just, everybody has this where you've met somebody that, like, on paper, they seem like they could be a good person that would fit your style and your personality, and you could be okay with hanging around. But it turns out they just fucking rub you the wrong way, man. And it irritates you. And nobody wants to be stuck in camp with that. And so all these things are kind of running through my head as I'm on my way to the airport to pick you up. Like, I didn't know. I didn't know. But it turns out, like, man, you're one of the top people. I'd take you hunting anytime, man. I actually really enjoyed your company. I enjoyed learning from you. I enjoyed hanging out with you and learning about you and your background. And I enjoyed the company on the mountain and on the river. There was like, it's just a rare thing when you take somebody hunting and they, like, literally you didn't annoy me one time, man. And that's saying something, because I'm easily annoyed.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I'll echo that sentiment. I think, after a while, we just develop these preferences. I think we have it in our heads, like, okay, well, that was by far the best hunting partner I ever had, or by far I've never laughed so hard around that person in camp. And I think what you kind of create over time is this, like, amalgam of a perfect person that you'd want to bring with you. And, like, you can easily become a fault finder where you're like, oh my God, this person, yeah, they're great hunting, but this person drives too fast, and they're reckless. And it's like, you're just looking for something, right?
Yeah.
Or, oh my God, this person, they don't do their dishes right away after preparing their meal. Oh, I can never go with them again. It's like, you're looking for an excuse not to go, as opposed to what we should be doing, or we should be saying, like, look, we're here for the same pursuit. Yeah, we're going to have our differences. If we can understand that, and we can get past, these little things and just focus on what's really important, and I'm looking forward to the round 2, which, hopefully will happen this fall. And it looks like all the signs are pointing that way. I mean,
me too.
There were so many lessons that, you're saying you learned a lot from me. I learned a lot from you, because, again, my experience is primarily East Coast hunting, where, again, the distances are really short when we're taking these shots. Even though I have a background in precision rifle shooting and I've trained precision rifle, it was interesting because, even our philosophies with firearms, where I was like, yeah, the muzzle velocity is this, and you're like, what's muzzle velocity? But then,
seriously, man, I don't know, whatever. I shoot the bullet and it goes.
Yeah, and you're accurate, and when you told me that one story about that one rifle, and you're like, I've shot this thing 3 times, and I cracked up. But I mean, like, I'm learning little things from every single person that I go out with. It doesn't matter, all the other personality differences, if there are personality differences or backgrounds or current occupations. Like, I learned a lot from the bear hunt, and the little things where you're like, yeah, if you're working with a partner, sometimes what you do is you set your partner up and then you drive away because the bear are conditioned to know. Like, I never forgot that.
Yeah, and
that you can turn the car on and it's like a dinner bell.
If we would have had bears actually hitting that barrel, that seriously is a great strategy. Like, walk in with 2 people to the bait barrel, rebait it, make all the noise, jingle the barrel, make, knock a stick against it, and then set one person up in the blind and have the other person go back to the truck, even if it's like 2 miles away. It doesn't matter. The bears know. Like, bears know this stuff. They do this for a living. And then they think that both people left that bait site, and they don't realize that the one person left or is still sitting there in the barrel, and the smells that they're picking up are just lingering from when they were there rebaiting it, and they think it's a dinner bell. So it was, and I think that's why it worked between us, Kevin. I'm turned off by big egos. I'm turned off by people that like the know-it-all types. The loudness, the look at me, I know the best, I am the best, I'm the biggest badass on the mountain, that shit turns me off. This is why I don't like most, hunting influencers, if you will, because a lot of them, dude, they're just like, it's just ego. It's just a bunch of BS. They're faking it. And they're not as good as they make themselves look on social media. Where me, man, I have no problem posting about a hunt that I failed on, and that's not an ego thing, me saying that. It's just I legitimately have nothing to prove to anybody. I don't care. You and we didn't get a bear on this hunt, and that was circumstantial. I blame that gigantic freaking snowbank that prevented me from getting that bear barrel set in time. But that was a mistake, if hindsight, I wish I would have just driven around the long way the first time and got up there and got that bear bait barrel. But if I would have done that, we may have gotten a bear and screwed us out of a fall hunt. And I'm really looking forward to you coming back in the fall when the bears are fatter, the bears are bigger, they're hungrier, they're building up for hibernation, and I'm going to set that barrel, the barrel's already set. I'm going to have I'm going to rescent the barrel and let that thing marinate for like 2 weeks before you get here. And I think we're going to have a ball, because it's just I really enjoyed being around somebody who is an absolute legitimate expert in so many things without the ego. And that's why I learned a lot from you. And I feel like that's why you learned a lot from me, because I am an expert in a lot of things, but I don't have like a big ego about it. I can always learn something. And
I think what it boils down to, Jim, is like, you gotta at some point just submit and say, I'm going to be the student on this, and I always say, like, with Mother Nature is a great teacher. And every time I go out into the great outdoors, I don't care if I'm doing the most routine thing, I'm learning something when I go out into the outdoors. And by the way, Mother Nature has a winning record. So if we think that we're going to beat Mother Nature all the time, absolutely not. Mother Nature will spank us.
Exactly.
She is a very moody lady. So I think that's the idea. It's like, when you go out with someone and you're training, you're traveling, or you're hunting or fishing, or doing whatever, you just got to say to yourself, like, look, I'm going to put on the white belt in this activity, even though I'm a multi-striped, red belt. And for those of you guys that are martial arts nerds, the red belt is a pretty significant thing. So I think the moment that you put on that white belt, or you put on your your training wheels, and you say, look, talk to me like I'm an absolute novice, then the egos are away. Like, I think the egos get out of the way, and they make room for the real learning to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, man. One thing I do have a question for you. Because I talk about this all the time on the show, and I realized it when you came out, because you're a guy who has a lot of experience in the woods on the eastern seaboard, and then in Utah and all that kind of stuff. What did you think? What was your reaction of the country of the extreme North Idaho Panhandle?
So the interesting thing with the Panhandle and that terrain and the vegetation up there, it's very, very reminiscent of what I've seen in Michigan and what I've seen in New York and Vermont and Maine. Extremely similar, mixed hardwoods, mixed evergreens, but I mean, far more evergreens than you're going to find in our woods here in New England. But the biggest difference that we have with the terrain that you guys are experiencing out there versus Michigan or even the Adirondacks is the grade, how steep it is. Because, I mean, just traveling through some of those switchbacks on that one mountain pass to get to this site, I mean, it was very, very steep. And I think at one point on the drive out, I joked, I was like, yeah, if a car were to go over here, you wouldn't find that car because you're just not looking down. You can't see it. Like
Yeah.
it's so steep out there. I mean, it's gorgeous. The woods smell thick. Like you breathe in and you can tell that it's organic and that there are layers upon layers of tamarack needles on the ground and old, substrate of leaves and whatnot. Like it just smells rich and organic. But you also realize when you're out there, like you're not alone, and we saw some pretty interesting tracks while we were out there. Walking up one time, we are like, look at this. And again, I'm still in East Coast mentality. And I'm like, oh, look, that looks like someone dumped down and put both their feet together. And you're like, that's a moose. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then on the trail camera that you put up, the big old cat that visited the bait site. I'm like,
Holy
yeah, that
cow,
thing was
man.
out there the whole time.
Like, that's a no bullshit. That's a big mountain lion, man. That is
That
a
is.
huge mountain lion. Did you zoom in and look at the paws on that thing?
Yeah. And to know that thing was there that whole time. And I mean, you and I have both been in the woods for decades at this point combined, and I've never seen one in person. I've known that I've been in their territory. I mean, I lived out in Utah for 2 years,
Yeah.
and I've hiked where there have been mountain lion
They get
sightings.
big in Utah.
Yeah, but like that thing could have been watching us the whole time. It could
Oh,
have
I'm
been
sure.
laughing at us the whole
He
time.
probably was. He probably was. I was going to tell you, man, I was wearing flip-flops the other day here in the yard, and I get this. So I have leftover a little gift of the United States Marines. I have what is called trench foot. And it has lingered, and it's like an extreme version of athlete's foot. Okay. So if I don't let my feet air out, they get really like super rashy and itchy. And my wife hates it. She thinks that like, I haven't washed my feet or something, but I have, and I do all the time. So this trench foot, it kind of like never goes away. You have to really air your feet out to prevent the trench foot. It's from wearing jungle boots and boots in the Marines without airing your feet out enough, and your feet get too wet. And it's kind of like this thing. It's like athlete's foot, but it's worse, right? So anyway, I take my boots off the other day, and holy cow, man, my feet were just like I'd been walking on roofs all day and inspecting job sites and all this stuff, and like I needed to just air them out, put my flip-flops on. Well, because of that, I'd gotten this little blister, and I like rubbed the blister with the heel of my other foot, and it opened it up, and I was like kind of worried it was going to get infected. So I went out in the yard, and I found some yarrow, and
Yes.
And I took that yarrow and I like kind of rubbed it in my hands until I made like this powdery substance, and I rubbed it on that open blister. And people are going to be grossed out by me telling them about the trench foot thing, but it's not as bad as it sounds. But it does hurt. It can really, really freaking hurt. I took that yarrow and I rubbed it in my hands and made like this powdery substance with it, and I rubbed it on that blister. Dude, I am not kidding you. It is 10 times more effective than Neosporin, and that is something I learned from you.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I'm not the foremost plant expert. My late mentor, Marty, was. And there are some great people out there who I would point you in the direction of. Dr. Nicole Appelian, amazing wild plants expert. Christopher Nierges, amazing plants expert. Orion Aon, who's a Colorado guy, amazing plant expert. Kate Smith, local here in North Carolina. Kate Smith is awesome. Arthur Haynes up in Maine. These are all people who, they are dedicating their lives to talking about edible medicinal plants, because let's face it, so many of our medicines that we use in this country are synthesized versions of natural remedies.
They are, totally.
And
they're exaggerated.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
And here's the other thing. There are additives to those. I don't want to get on a rant here, but
there are
additives to those medicines that you don't want in your body. But if you can do it the natural way, which
there's, yeah, absolutely. Microplastics.
Exactly. So I would rather you guys learn from these people who can say, look, here's the natural way of using a pure remedy to treat yourself. And yes, there is going to be some difficulty, and this is the one of the issues with using natural remedies. It's not as measured as a synthetic version where they can say like, well, this is pure 5 milligrams of whatever. So you have to know yourself. You have to kind of develop a feel for it. But the reality is, what they're like, can you overdose on some of these remedies? Yeah. But it's not going to be an overdose like you would get from, doing meth,
Yeah.
cocaine, or something like that. Like, could you take too much of an antibiotic? Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen to you, but the likelihood of something being terrible, not very likely.
I mean,
So,
I don't even think that that's what the concern is when it comes to things like neosporins and ibuprofens and those kind of things. The overdose is possible, but that's not the concern. It's the microplastics in the chemicals in the bullshit. Like when you go to like the hospital, you go see a doctor for a common flu or something like that, and they're prescribing you all this crap that is just incentivized by the pharmaceutical companies so the doctor can go to, Tahiti or something with his family because he prescribed, a 1,000 prescriptions or whatever the incentive is. I'm just over that kind of stuff. I'm over that kind of stuff in society where we're getting fed shit that is more harmful to us than it is good because of somebody else being incentivized by selling it to us. And it's the same. I don't mean to just pick on doctors. It's the same with food products. It's the same with herbicides and pesticides and all these things, and farmers buying these bulk tanks of Roundup to treat, certain fields and, all this stuff. This is why, like, there are cultures in the world right now in the year 2024 that have people that have, that have entire societies that have never died from cancer because they don't get cancer. And that's because they are very natural. And I am not like a granola bar eating hippie. I'm not a hipster that just preaches about this stuff. It is stuff that I think that is important because we've been lost as a society to fall for this so-called expertise as if like the pharmaceutical company or some politician has our best interests at heart. And they don't. I'm sorry, they don't. They get paid to tell us that they're experts in this and that we should take that. And so, like, a perfect example, and I don't mean to derail us, Kevin, but a perfect example, man, is for years for this trench foot stuff. When I open up a wound because I scratched it or something with my foot or something, it gets really painful. So for a long time, I will take that Neosporin with the pain reliever and I'll cover my foot in it, and it kind of helps with the pain, but it still takes 4 or 5 days to heal that wound. Where that yarrow plant, man, I don't even think I did it right. All I did was pick a bunch, put it in my hand, and rubbed it together, and it made like this powdery, almost a paste, but it wasn't a paste, And I just rubbed that on that open wound. It stung for like 10 seconds. But it was worth it, man, because the next day, it didn't bother me at all. It was like scabbed over and good to go. I'm good to go.
Yeah, what you made is what's called a poultice. That's the technical term when you like either mix it with water. A lot of people would do it with saliva, believe it or not, because the enzymes in your saliva start breaking down the plant structure, the cellulose.
Yeah.
So you created a poultice and you put it on there. You did it exactly the way you should have. And it's interesting because there were so many plants that have just this amazing property. Like, people don't realize that there's a plant that grows in your yard, right? And you guys can look this one up and see if I'm BSing you. And it's called broadleaf plantain. Now, there's broadleaf plantain, there's longleaf plantain, but with broadleaf plantain, you can chew it, you can make poultice. And let's say that you have an insect bite. You put that poultice over the insect bite and you put a dressing over the top of it, and that poultice helps draw out any of the toxins or the venom that is inside that insect bite on your skin.
Yeah.
Now, this type of knowledge, right? This type of knowledge is the stuff that fascinates me to this day. And again, you submit yourself to being the student and you go out into the great outdoors and you say to yourself, well, what can I learn? Well, go out there with a few different plant books. Go out there with someone who knows the plants and says, hey, I can guarantee you're going to be safe when you're with me. You're going to go learn some stuff. You're going to try this as medicine. You're going to try this, St. John's wort that grows right here in Idaho, right? You're going to find the St. John's wort. You make tea with it. Tell me how you feel in the morning, right? And it's St. John's wort just mellows people out at night, right? And it's what people take. Um, it's so important to get out there and learn about your environment. And this is the beauty, like kind of like what summarizes our trip is that, yeah, I come from a very strong bushcraft background, but people forget that bushcraft isn't just, carving and doing camp crafts, but like true bushcraft is living with the environment. And that means hunting, fishing, trapping. It means, getting out there in all the seasons. And there's always something to learn. So if you go out there telling yourself, hey, I'm the master of the woods, it's like, no, you're not. The woods are going to humble you. You don't know all the plants, you don't know all the animals, you don't know everything. Because even the best that are out there will still carry reference books because you can get something wrong. So it's important to go out there with that open mind. And if, again, you go out there with an open mind, with other people with open minds, and you start learning together, you have this great time along the way. And, maybe you'll get lucky and get a bear. Maybe you'll get lucky and get a big old cutthroat. Maybe you won't get lucky, but you'll have a great time along the way, and then you'll do it again in the fall. And that's what I think we're going to do in a couple months.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the reasons that like your craft, this craft of bushcraft, that was a lot of crafts in one sentence, wasn't it?
Yeah, just a couple.
The art of bushcraft, I guess, is maybe a better way to say that, is super fascinating to me from the standpoint that, like, when I talk to hunters and the purpose and foundational reason behind my show is to fight back against the anti-hunting movement. And part of that is we discussed that, hunters, there is an old Native American saying where, and I wish I could quote this by his name. I'm totally drawing a blank on it, and it's because I'm on the spot, but usually I can quote the name of which Native American said this. But he basically said that when my arrow kills a moose, it is not me or the arrow that kills the moose. It is nature that kills the moose, right? And so what he's getting at with this quote is hunting with everything primal and humanistic built into the craft and the art of hunting. This is a natural thing that is as old as the human race. Okay, and so I guess one way to articulate that is you have some of these anti-hunting folks out there, and some of them are going out and maybe they're bird watchers and they're taking pictures of birds, and maybe they're like wildlife photographers, or maybe they're just like they're naturalists and they want to be hikers and they want to go experience nature. They want to partake and be a spectator of what the natural world is. Hunting isn't like that. When you are a hunter, you are not a spectator. You are a participant in the natural environment. And this is what that circle of what being a human is. You give a life, you take a life. You kill an animal to harvest the meat and you sustain yourself. And by killing that animal, you're giving the newer animals, the younger animals, a chance to thrive and spread their genes. And you're preventing the growth of these predatory animals that can get out of control, and they can kill these prey species at a great rate, and they can do great destruction to the ecosystem. But by hunting bears and by hunting mountain lions, you're helping balance that, and that is the story of humanity. That is what has always existed. Now we have a more formal, process. We have to buy a hunting license through the Fish and Game and through these biologists that want to manage this system. And that's okay, because actually, if we listen to them, they do a pretty good job for the most part. There's some complaints that can be had and always will be, but those complaints and the balance of what, like, the North American model of wildlife management and conservation has attributed to, like, the success of species recovering from the brink of extinction. This all comes from hunting. This doesn't come from PETA. This doesn't come from some wildlife or anti-hunting activist that donates $100 to the Humane Society of the United States. This doesn't come from the Center of Biological Diversity. none of the productive conservational efforts have ever come from those organizations. They come from hunters. We're the ones that raise the money. We're the ones that pay for the conservational efforts. We're the ones that improve habitat. We are the ones that transplant species that have previously become extinct in places like Tennessee now has Rocky Mountain elk running on it, like they did 300 years ago. And so the point is when we're talking about the depths of what hunting is, and we're talking about the future of hunting from the standpoint in this modern societal thing where everybody wants to call it trophy hunting and call it, they're just killing, they're just a bunch of rednecks out there and they just want blood and blah, blah, blah. When we get caught up in that and we see that the reality on the ground does not align with that propagated information that is fed to us by these anti-hunting organizations, and we actually go out and experience what real hunting is, we come to the realization that hunting is a humanistic thing, and it's a primal thing, and it's part of what has made our planet thrive. And so to argue against it and try to shut it down through legislative actions and through, infiltrating our fish and game commissions and trying to get petitions signed and a bunch of like a ballot box initiative onto this fall's election cycle to ban this hunt or introduce wolves into areas where they haven't been for 200 years. Those things are going against the North American model of wildlife conservation, and it is going to affect our wildlife so that these folks that think that they're partaking in Mother Nature by going out and being a wildlife photographer or a bird watcher or a hiker or somebody that just wants to experience and be in nature, you're taking away from that by removing hunting. And I think that, Kevin, I don't know how I got on this diatribe, if you will, but it is this awakening or awakening that we need to like produce, I guess, for the general public to understand that these anti-hunting folks are doing way more damage for our wildlife and their habitat than they're ever doing good for. Am I making any sense?
You were. So while you were talking, I'm here in my office and I just pulled out my tag and it's like, okay, $231 for this license and $195 for that one. And it's like, you ask the average person who protests hunting, like, okay, how much did you actually spend on your actual cause? And most people would say, well, I just feel very strongly about it. Well, you're not.
But did you put your money where your mouth is and spend more than like a $25 donation?
Yeah.
That actually, by the way, if let's say somebody donates to PETA or the Humane Society of the United States, or which I separate for anybody that's maybe not the Western Huntsman podcast listener, the Humane Society of the United States this is not the same entity that is the Humane Society that rescues dogs and cats in your local communities.
Mm-hmm.
It's a totally different entity. It's a national entity, and they are very anti-hunting. Or let's say you donate $25 to the Center for Biological Diversity. All that money that you're donating is going to CEO salaries and commercials that they run to make you feel bad about a cat that hasn't been adopted. That money does not go to wildlife management or conservation efforts or habitat improvement. That is solely on the shoulder of the hunter. That is where that money comes from. Only hunter. Kevin was just alluding to what he spent to buy this bear tag. That money may or may not yield Kevin a freezer full of bear meat and a cool, maybe we'll do a Euro mount skull for him or something like that, right? If he gets a bear. But that money does not go to anything other than the management of our wildlife and the conservation and habitat improvements that are required to make that happen. So,
yeah, that's serious difference right there, and unfortunately people they just don't get it, but maybe we just continue to put out the good word. We'll see more people join our ranks and stop taking up the rally cries of the antis.
Well, and again, it's a worn out. It's not worn out because it's relevant. But what I always say, and I learned this from my buddy Scott Rockholm to give him proper credit. We cannot manage wildlife through being or by being emotionally intoxicated people that don't know the reality of what it takes to manage this wildlife. And to, when you hunt a bear, these bears, like in the area we were hunting, there are roughly 2 to 4 bears per square mile. That is a huge, wild number. And those bears will kill multiple fawns and multiple elk calves throughout the year because they're very efficient at that. Most of the time, they're just, cruising for berries and eating the brush and the vegetation that grows that are appealing to a bear. And that's what I would say 80% of their diet is. They're also scavengers. That's roughly 10% of their diet. But then they have this springtime, like right now, the fawns are dropping. We had this fawn on our property, it just looks like a little baby Bambi, right? Those things are super susceptible to a black bear. And the black bear does not have to be some large predatory mature bear. A young 1-year-old bear can take out a fawn easy. And that's what happens. And that's that throws that imbalance, that creates that imbalance within our system, the ecosystems. And so we've got to manage these bears by hunting them. It creates better genes for future bears. It creates more diversity amongst the landscape for the deer and the elk and the sheep and the goats and everything else that runs wild on these landscapes. All depend on us taking out a certain population of the bear just to keep them at edge. Because if you listen to, like I did an episode with a guy named Dr. Valerius Geis who studied this very thing for his entire career. He has since passed. And the world is missing him for sure. But he did studies. He called it a predator pit. If you let the predators overpopulate certain areas, what happens is the wolves will come in and they'll kill a large percentage of the ungulate population, meaning deer and elk and whatnot, hoofed animals. And then the bears will keep that number down. And so in an area like you and I hunted, Kevin, we have wolves and we have 2 species of bear, and we also have lynx, we have bobcats, we have mountain lions, all these predatory species. So just by going out and hunting these predator species, you and I get this primal fulfillment as hunters and humans where we can go out and pursue this thing, and it's not for the trophy. Like if you think bear hunting is for a trophy, you haven't tasted black bear meat. And the second part of that is by being successful and tagging out on a bear, we have contributed to the essentially what the growth of every other population of these ungulate species. So everything is diverse, and it just makes sense. I don't know how people do not understand that. Sorry, I went off. I went off on us, buddy.
No, that's fine. And like just bringing it back to the bushcraft thing, right? Like when people say like, oh, you shouldn't go into the woods and build, fires and camp and whatnot. It's like it actually helps the undergrowth if you are taking away the firewood, taking away the fuel. I mean, we look at California, why so many of the California wildfires have taken off. It's the wind, but we know that wind is only 1/3 of the equation. Yeah, the wind carries oxygen, but there was some fuel. And that fuel is left over in the undergrowth when the electrical companies aren't allowed to go in and clear out the forests, when foresters aren't allowed to do their job and maintain the forests because they're disrupting the animal habitat according to the politicians.
Yeah.
When the reality is the animal, like certain trees actually need forest fires, like ponderosa pines need forest fires to
absolutely
to help them germinate. But that being said, like a fire cleanses, but it shouldn't cleanse in the way that it has, to the point where it's cleansing people out of their homes.
It should cleanse, not devastate, and that's what happens without forest management.
Yeah. So I mean, it's all interconnected, and I think that's what we're really getting at here. Is that's the message. Whether you want to strictly be a bushcrafter or you strictly want to be a hunter, at some point you're going to blend those two together. And at some point, you're going to realize the same issues that you're going through is what the other side is going through.
Yeah, I think that's how I got off on that rant that I just went on. That I'm already feeling guilty about. I didn't mean to take over the show with that, but there is that's the thing, is everything, like you and I know that when you're in the woods, there is this cycle. It's a cyclic system of everything is tied together. When you and I go fish, everything is tied together. The healthy fish population in that river is directly tied to the healthy bear population in those woods, which is also directly tied to the ungulate species and the ungulates that eat the grass, and then they run up the hill and they poop on the side of the mountain, and that puts nitrogen into the land that allows the trees and the shrubbery and the growth to take place, and all this cycle of things that happen. And so I guess that's my plea to hunters, is to listen to a lot of the information that comes like out of, we were talking about Neosporin versus yarrow, the natural plant that grows. Well, I don't know where it grows, man. I know it grows in my neck of the woods, but I don't, and I only learned that from hunting for a few days with you. And so, but what I do know is this is all this big cycle, and everything ties together from a sense that if one thing doesn't thrive, nothing will thrive. And that is the importance, and that's why I encourage hunters to understand things like bushcraft and some of the natural vegetation that grows. Understanding, everybody knows that elk eat plants, right? But to be a good hunter, you have to understand what plants elk eat, because they don't just eat anything. They're pretty particular if you really dive into it. And I could tell you exactly what they eat if you guys have this curiosity, but I don't want to bore everybody to death. And deer, they have a different diet. Deer and elk do not necessarily eat the same things. And so understanding that makes you better, makes you a better hunter, and understanding this Kevin, Estela, Fieldcraft Survival, bushcraft, that kind of stuff. It has made me a better woodsman, and it has made me a better hunter, and that's why this stuff is important. And I'm proud to hunt with you, man.
Oh yeah, and round 2 is coming up. And
yes, sir.
Unfortunately, my recorder, because I'm recording this too, and like we said, guys, this is going to be hopefully dual streamed on Jim's podcast and the Fieldcraft podcast. But my recorder is like flashing that I'm going to lose batteries.
All right, brother. Well, let's wrap it up. We've been going for an hour and a half here, and it was a really good conversation, man. And I just,
oh my God,
I always have fun with you, man. We always ruffle some feathers and have a good time, and it's I don't know, it's productive in my opinion, and productive is what I'm going for. So, for the folks of the Western Huntsman podcast, will you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yeah, so you guys can find me on Instagram. You can find me on X, formerly Twitter, Estela Wild Ed, ESTELAWILDED. You can find me at the courses that I teach for Fieldcraft Survival. I just joined a new social media platform called Mimic, where I'm answering questions for a fee. I'll actually do, a video response, or I'll jump on an actual phone call with you guys. So that's a whole new thing that I just started yesterday. I haven't done any consultations yet, but I'm the first outdoors guy doing what I do on there. So we'll see. And obviously you guys can find me in the woods with Jim this October, but we're not telling you where we are going. So for my listeners, Jim, where can people find you?
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I can't wait for, what did we call it? Unfinished business, right?
Mm-hmm.
UB, unfinished business. We have some serious redemption this fall, and I'm really looking forward to it. You guys can find me on Instagram or at on X at the Western Huntsman, and I appreciate the interactions. If you guys have questions or want to dive into the hunting community and find out about what the future of hunting looks like and how it relates to the human experience, feel free to hit me up. I love talking about this stuff. And so, Kevin, Always great to have you on the show, man. I really can't express enough how pleasantly surprised I was to have you on the mountain with me and experience, although we didn't tag out on anything other than some fish, my goodness, it was a good time.
Yes, it was. And pleasure having you on my show on the flip side of that coin. So appreciate you, and we'll definitely take care of that unfinished business very soon.
You betcha. I've got my camera set. It is ready to go. We are going to know what's coming, and the fall is going to be a great hunt, man. So you take care and have a great night, and I will talk to you soon.
Sounds great, Jim. You too.
You made it. That's the end of the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please make sure you're following us on Instagram at The Western Huntsman and write us a good review at Apple Podcasts. Thanks, guys. See you next time. Stay Western, and I'll see you on the mountain.